Dr. Marguerite Mullee. Today we're going to be listening to all sorts of Christmas music, from plain chant to carols, from songs proclaiming the mystery of Christ's birth to drinking songs demanding money and ale. There are many types of Christmas music covering different aspects of the holiday. So instead of going in strict chronological order, I'm going to be talking about some of the more popular themes of Christmas music. But we will start at the beginning. In the very early centuries of Christianity, there was no celebrating Christmas. Revelry is very difficult when you're being persecuted. However, in 313, Emperor Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, effectively decriminalizing Christianity, and the age of evangelization began. One very potent form of evangelization involved people getting together to celebrate. The bishops of the new Christian religion instituted annual festivals to the saints and martyrs, which just happened to fall on the already existing days of pagan celebrations. They figured this would help convert more people. You can't just take away centuries of traditional feasting and partying. Suppression would not work, but the church fathers could substitute what the feasting was for. If people were going to celebrate, let them celebrate the holy days, holidays of the church. So the Bacchanalia, the Saturnalia, the Feast of Yule, the winter solstice, these traditional feasts from different cultures during the darkest days of the year, all of them were replaced with Christmas. In those early centuries, as far as the church was concerned, music celebrating the birth of Christ was a solemn affair. Advent, the 4 weeks before Christmas, is a time of waiting, and in earlier days, serious fasting. During the Middle Ages, the O antiphons were composed, and they are still chanted today before and after the Magnificat during Vespers the week before Christmas, asking for Christ to come. Each has basically the same melody with different text and using different names for the Messiah. O sapientia, meaning wisdom, O radix Jesse, root of Jesse, are two examples. And one other, O Emmanuel. We're now going to hear the O antiphon, O Emmanuel. Hear the veni in there. By the 19th century, the text was translated into a hymn using an old tune. This will be familiar. And shortly after that, the English version became available. So each of the 7 verses of this hymn is a paraphrase of one of the O antiphons, calling Christ by various names and beseeching for him to come. Now let's get back to the celebrations. You really couldn't fit the concept of feasting and revelry into the sacred music of the time. So enter the carol, based upon popular dance and folk song tunes. Their themes range from beautiful religious truths to tavern songs. The word carol comes from the Middle English carol, which meant to dance in a ring. It seems to go back to the Latin choraula and Greek chorales, a flute player for chorus dancing, ultimately to the choros, which was originally a circling dance. According to tradition, in 1223, St. Francis of Assisi created some of the first carols, complete with ring dancing, intended as preaching aids. From there, friars, troubadours, and wandering minstrels spread new musical ideas throughout Italy, Spain, France, England, and Germany. The typical carol gives voice to the common emotions of people using language and music that is easily recognized by all. There were carols for all the major feast days, not just for Christmas. Unfortunately, the only ones that remained popular are the Christmas carols. This next example, Angelus ad Virginem, is from the 13th century. It's a Franciscan carol brought to England by French friars. You will hear the strong meter based in dance and a very appealing melody. The text is not directly from the liturgy, but it does describe the Annunciation, the angel Gabriel appearing to Mary. The use of non-liturgical text and a dance-like meter was totally different from church music, and music like this would never be allowed in the church. So here is Angelus ad Virginem. The use of vernacular, the language of the people, came soon after. Very quickly, Angelus ad Virginem had a new translation into Old English. What is interesting is that even though written in the language of the people, the sentiments of the early carols don't really differ from Latin hymns. It's very possible that some hymns and carols were written by priests trying to tell the meaning of Christmas using more accessible music. So here we are with the Old English version. Gabriel from heaven came. Besides the theme of the Annunciation, there were many songs about Mary. In this next example, There is no rose of such virtue, we will listen to a medieval text, but it's set to modern music. The text contains both English and Latin. This technique is known as macaronic, that is a mixture of the vernacular and Latin. It was used quite a bit with music dealing with religious subjects. The use of Latin words, or even just syllables or parts of words, was seen as giving the song some credibility in dealing with a sacred subject. This next song first appeared in William Ballott's lute book from the late 16th and early 17th century. It was a collection of music popular during the time of Elizabeth I. Blessed be that maid Marie is also macaronic, with the verses using both English and Latin. The refrain is entirely in Latin. Jesu hodie natus est de virgine. Today Jesus is born of a virgin. Joseph in all of this. He's often portrayed as an older, kind of passive fellow. He doesn't get a very big part in the Bible. However, the songs that are written for him celebrate his humility and his embrace of being a stepfather. The title of this French song, Joseph est bien marié, translates to Joseph is well married. A kind of good for you, Joseph. It's usually sung with all women's voices. Between each verse comes the chorus, Joseph is well married. This next song is from Mary's perspective, asking Joseph to help rock her child. It's originally from a 16th century German mystery play, Joseph Liebe, Joseph Mein. carols that speak of the Christ child. What Child Is This is an English carol. The text was written in 1865, but it used the old tune Greensleeves from William Ballott's lute book. Let's backtrack a bit. At the beginning of the 19th century, carols were only sung in a few isolated communities in rural England, although waits, the town criers, would continue the practice. Unfortunately, the Industrial Revolution and urbanization abolished the old traditions. The 19th century was a pretty bleak time for the working class, and there was a longing for connection to a romanticized past. Many of the carols we know today were written during this period and were an attempt to go back to this idealized time and place. So no wonder that this text was set to a tune from the Elizabethan period. So here is What Child Is This? This next song is from around the same time period. It was published in France in 1862. It speaks of the humility of the Christ child being born in a stable and mentions the wait of 4,000 years. Il est né le divin enfant. This next example also describes the scene at the stable, but this one is not a carol. It's a polyphonic motet from the Renaissance by Tomás Luis de Vitoria. Vitoria set this 10th century text using the musical vocabulary of high Renaissance liturgical music. This would have been considered appropriate to sing in church. Did you notice towards the end when they were singing Alleluia, it went into triple time, a dance-like meter, which was very interesting, kind of unusual for sacred church music. One word often heard in Christmas music is Noel. It comes from the French Noël, meaning Christmas, originally from the Old French Noël, a reference to the Christmas season, which comes from the Latin natalis, birth. The term natalis dies, birthday, is used in Church Latin in reference to the birthday of Christ, or in other words, Christmas. In Middle English, it's known as Noel, spelled with a W. Notice in this next example that there is a refrain. It's a short chorus that keeps repeating after each verse. The refrain was probably sung by everyone, and the verses would be improvised by a soloist. This is Noel Sing We.
Noel sing we, o rex pacificus isicum.
Here's the verse. This next well-known carol, the first Noel, originated in Cornwall. By the way, in this song, Noel was originally spelled with the W, N-O-W-E-L-L. It was probably around in earlier centuries, but the form that we know was first published in Carols Ancient and Modern in 1823. So here is the first Noel. Of Hark the Herald Angels Sing first appeared in 1739 in the collection Hymns and Sacred Poems. A number of people are responsible for the version that we know today. Charles Wesley, one of the founding ministers of Methodism, wrote the original version and called it Hymn for Christmas Day. He had used very slow and solemn music for the lyrics, but that music has not been used for a very long time. Wesley's original opening line was, "Hark, how all the welkin rings." Welkin means the heavens or the skies, so the skies are ringing with sound. The other founder of Methodism, George Whitefield, didn't really care for that line, so he changed it to the one we know today, "Hark, the herald angels sing." In 1840, 100 years after the lyrics were published, Felix Mendelssohn composed a cantata to commemorate Johann Gutenberg's invention of movable type printing. Music from this cantata was then adapted by William H. Cummings to fit the lyrics of Hark the Herald Angels Sing, and that is what we still sing today. Another carol that tells of angels singing is On Christmas Night, also known as the Sussex Carol. It was written in 1864 by Luke Wadig, an Irish Franciscan bishop. English Protestants eventually started using it, and the tune and text were collected by Ralph Vaughan Williams in Sussex in the early 20th century. In 17th century England, the rise of Puritanism was to blame for the extinction of carol singing during that time. It discouraged the excesses of general revelry and was basically against music in any part of the liturgy. In 1642, the first ordinances were issued to suppress the performance of plays. A year later, some shops in London were actually open on Christmas Day. By 1647, parish officers were arrested for allowing ministers to preach at Christmas, even for decorating the church. Christmas and all other holidays were banished. This all ended in 1660 with the Restoration. Celebrations came back, but like the monarchy, were not as flamboyant. They were more social than ceremonial, with the middle class more apt to celebrate than the wealthy. In 1700, the first authorized Christmas hymn appeared in the Anglican service, while shepherds watched their flocks by night. It was the first, and for more than 80 years, the only Christmas hymn permitted to be used in Anglican churches. It's interesting to note that the story of the shepherds was a very common theme, probably because of the fashion for pastorals at that time. So here is While Shepherds Watched Their Flocks. Torch, Jeanette Isabella, is a 17th century Christmas carol from the Provence region of France. It was translated into English in the 18th century, and the music is actually dance from the French nobility. Jeanette and Isabella are two female farm workers. They have found the baby and his mother in a stable. They're happy and excited, and they run to a nearby village to tell everyone, who then rush to see the Holy Family. Visitors to the stable are told to be quiet so the baby can enjoy his dreams. I didn't mean to do that. Past 3 o'clock is an English Christmas carol, loosely based on the call of the traditional town crier. The melody is an old traditional tune, London Waits. Remember, Wait is another name for a town crier. George Radcliffe Woodward wrote the words to go with the tune, and it was published in the Cambridge Carol Book in 1924. Wexford Carol is a traditional religious Irish Christmas carol from County Wexford, probably written in the late 18th, early 19th centuries. It was written in Irish, and we will be listening, though, to the very popular English translation.
Good people, all this Christmas time, consider well and bear in mind what our good God for us has done in sending His beloved Son. With Mary holy we should pray to God with love this Christmas day. In Bethlehem upon that morn there was a blessed Messiah born.
The concept of drinking to one another's health is quite ancient. Praise of Dan Noel can be traced back to at least the 13th century. There's an Anglo-Norman carol in which Noel, after telling every man to keep an open house and give his neighbors drink, concludes with the old Saxon changes of health: wassail, good health, and drink health. There were Yule songs among the Anglo-Saxons, and their festivities included the procession of the boar's head, holly and ivy contests, and songs and dances. Now, the tradition of going door to door goes back to pre-Christian fertility rites, where the villagers went through orchards and would loudly shout to drive out evil spirits. They'd pour cider on the roots of trees to encourage fertility. Eventually, this would happen on the 12th night, January 5th, with men of the village going out to the trees carrying the wassail bowl. They would fire their guns in the air and bang pots and pans to intimidate the trees. The trees were actually threatened with an axe if they did not produce well in the coming year. By the 17th century, the wassail was a definite institution. People would carry a bowl of spiced ale from house to drink health in expectation of a contribution. This is probably where our custom of tipping at Christmas time comes from. We're going to hear an old wassail song now, Tapster Drinker.
Tapster Drinker, fill another ale and not have I to God send us good sail. Avail the stick, avail he is good ale found. Drink to me and I to thee, and let the door go round.
Wassail songs were extremely popular, and they became associated with luck visits made around the neighborhood. They overlapped and merged with the waits who traveled the streets of the cities. They were paid to sing and play during the holidays. So, a group would sing, and after getting a tip, would wish luck on the household. The communal bowl would be decorated with garlands and ribbons, and highly valued singers would be fed and given money, and even have their bowl replenished.
Wassail, wassail all over the town. How bright it is white and our ale it is brown. How bold it is made on the white maple tree. With the wassailing bowl we'll drink to thee. Here's a health to the ox and to his right eye. Pray God send our master a good Christmas pie. A good Christmas pie that may we all see. With the wassailing bowl we'll drink to thee. Here's a health to the cow and to
This next very popular song is a luck visit tune, which probably came to England from France. It dates from the 16th century, or maybe even earlier. The earliest known printed edition of the carol is in a broadsheet dated to around 1760. Broadsheets were similar in size to newspapers, used the same quality paper, and they were distributed on the streets. They would have texts of songs printed, but usually no notated music. Today's program with "We Wish You a Merry Christmas." It's a traditional English Christmas carol from the English West Country. The text had previously been performed by carolers and wassailers in the 19th century with a variety of tunes. The greeting, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, began to be used around the early 18th century. This is another example of a luck song. Wealthy people of the community gave Christmas treats to the carolers on Christmas Eve, including figgy pudding, that, by the way, did not necessarily contain figs. It was usually raisins or plums. So now we wish you a Merry Christmas. To be a very different Christmas from what we are all used to. But As the Christmas story tells us, even in the depths of darkness, we know that light is going to come. Wishing you all a peaceful and joyous Christmas. Thank you.